take a look at your state and make note of what party your senators belong to, because those people within a 50-50 Senate, they're going to be either your biggest advocates or your biggest headache. I mean, that's just the simple reality of it. In a 50-50 Senate, any individual senator on the Democratic side can tank legislation. And what that really means is, especially for an industry that sometimes has more enemies on the Hill than it does friends, we really need to make a case to these folks that what we're doing is important, and that we're not something that can just be, cast aside for political points. So if any of you have any connections or any work in West Virginia, my advice is get in good with Senator Manchin. His office is facing an avalanche of calls from people like Eben and myself every day who know that he really is the most powerful man in Washington right now. But what he really is going to pay attention to is calls from constituents and calls from employers that have jobs in his state. West Virginia needs all the help it can get, frankly, and Senator Manchin knows that, and so he's not going to let bills that would, severely harm the industry in his state make it through the Senate. So take a look at the map, make a note of your senators, make sure you call your senators if any of the legislation that we're talking about comes to the table, and just know that, buckle in, because we're going to be in for quite the wild ride over the next 2 years. The 2022 Senate map actually looks pretty decent for the Democrats. They do have a chance at actually picking up some seats, but Republicans know that, things are very, very, very close, and it doesn't take more than a strong breeze for them to take back the Senate. So these next 2 years are going to be an interesting one, interesting one for the congressional agenda, I should say. Excuse me. So talking again about the House and the Senate, when we're looking at pieces of key legislation, the stuff we're mainly looking at is going to be in energy and commerce and T&I on the House side, and then energy and natural resources and commerce, science, and transportation on the Senate side. The reason that I kept this slide on here from our pre-election presentation is E&R on the Senate is going to be particularly interesting because two of the key players on that are Joe Manchin and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, who is kind of at this point rapidly becoming the Republican equivalent to Joe Manchin. There was actually some rumors floating around that she's mostly put to bed, but not entirely, that she was considering leaving the Republican Party and not joining the Democrats, but caucusing in the Senate as an independent. So we'll really see what happens with that. E&R is kind of becoming almost a bellwether for the entirety of the Senate as a whole. And if any crucial, quote unquote, green bills come through the Senate, a lot of them are going to start there. So that is a committee that is going to just become increasingly important from our advocacy agenda perspective. And it's something that we're really going to need to pay attention to over these next couple of years, just to see where leadership in that committee is thinking and going. All right, so the Biden agenda, this is kind of what we're really interested in here. Biden has kind of, as all presidents do, try to get off to a roaring start. He's already signed a ton of executive orders. Most of them have to do with COVID. There are quite a few, though, that are climate and green related that we're not really going to get into here, but are something that we are going to have to worry about over the next couple of years. Right now, the administration is really focused on stimulus. The only reason they won the Senate, frankly, was that promise of an additional stimulus check. And they're trying as best as they can to deliver that swiftly. Right now, it looks like we're going to get that first stimulus package sometime in March is their plan for passage. They're drafting up stuff now. They're in the earlier stages of trying to get some Republicans on board. They're not, frankly, having a ton of luck. There's not a lot of appetite in the Republican caucus for another $2 trillion bill. But they are working on it. The Senate and the House, however, have already started the process to move forward through reconciliation, which I'll get to more in a bit. But the basic content of this bill, we're looking at a very large package, kind of similar in intent to the CARES Act. There's going to be a significant chunk of that is going to be made up of aid to state and local governments. A lot of that's going to go to things like transportation and infrastructure projects to make sure that there aren't any budget shortfalls. And then most of the rest of that bill is direct payments to taxpayers, vaccine and testing funding, and then some other stuff like unemployment benefits. There's about $50 billion in small business aid in there. There's aid for childcare, reopening schools, other immediate response funding. The gist of that legislation is the Biden administration sees this as a bill that could make an immediate impact in combating the coronavirus and helping Americans just get through the winter. The bill that we're really interested in, frankly, as an industry, is going to be that second package. Biden has talked about a major infrastructure package, and in that bill, he's not just going to address infrastructure. He wants to talk about climate change. He wants to talk about student debt relief. This is essentially the bill that he campaigned on in so many ways. The reason that he's going to be able to do these things, and this is kind of a procedural quirk, is that reconciliation process. Biden has aimed for bipartisanship, but a lot of Republican senators are already very concerned about the fact that we put on so much to the national debt over the last year. There's not really an appetite from them for additional trillion-dollar bills. I mean, this second bill that Biden is talking about is another $2 trillion package, so that's $4 trillion right there. That means that they're going to have to resort to the reconciliation process. That is originally a budget-related process, which, according to the Senate parliamentarian, the rules maker, can only have budget-related provisions in it. But as a result of that, it only requires 50 votes to pass. So they can get a lot of stuff through that. This reconciliation is how Republicans were able to pass the big tax cut package in the Trump administration. This is the same procedure. It does limit what they can accomplish. There are things, for example, like a $15 minimum wage that they have proposed as part of this second bill. There's some question as to whether or not that would be allowed, with most folks saying no, it would not be a budget provision, so it can't be included. But what this means is, again, coming back to Senator Manchin, in order to get something through under reconciliation, they can make it as partisan as they want, but they need every single member of the Senate in the Democratic caucus to hold ranks. And Senator Manchin has been a little vocal already. He's already butted heads with the administration about his feelings on these things, particularly the direct payments. He wants to see something more targeted. He's concerned about the deficit. And the White House has already kind of ticked him off, to be honest. They've done some interviews in West Virginia, kind of going behind his back with local state media. And frankly, he's not happy about that, as no senator would be. So keep an eye on Senator Manchin. And like I said, if any of you have connections to West Virginia, use them, because if we start to see a lot of provisions that would harm our industry in that second bill, Senator Manchin is going to be the one who can make sure that they don't make it through.
Hey, Zach, can I just add something here?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what you just said. Manchin is a critical player right now. You could argue he's the most important person in Washington right now. Forget about Harris being the tie-bearing, which technically she is, but Manchin is going to be the guy that everybody goes to try to get that deciding vote, to keep it from a 50-50. So yeah, but keep your eyes on him. I know that there are fears out there for the Green New Deal and things like that, but people like Manchin aren't going to go that far in a state like West Virginia. So Zach, you said it well. I just want to underscore the importance of this guy.
Yep, absolutely, Evan. So let's talk a little more about that second stimulus package. This is, like I said, a big bill, tackling a lot of things. And the aim of it is supporting a long-term economic recovery as we make our way out of the coronavirus pandemic. So it's going to include a lot of things in there. It's going to include an infrastructure package, like I said, likely to include student debt relief. There's going to be elements of the Democrats' climate agenda in there, and a whole lot more that I'm just not going to get into right now. This is all going to be based, we're expecting, on Biden's Build Back Better plan that he ran on. Now, for the purposes of this presentation, I kind of have to rely on what I've heard and on his campaign plan, because the actual presidential plan has not been released yet. It's actually being released today. I'm not entirely sure when. I haven't seen it yet, but their plan is to unveil that at some point, probably this afternoon. So everything I'm about to say could be out of date in 2 hours, but we're not we're not expecting, I should say, tremendous change from what he campaigned on. In addition to that, we're expecting a lot of this is going to be based after the 116th Congress, the last Congress's H.R. 2, the Moving Forward Act, which was a big Democrat messaging bill that they put out in the run-up to the campaign, part of their pitch of, look what we'll pass if we win the White House and the Senate. H.R. 2 is an interesting piece of legislation for us. There's some stuff in there that we're not a fan of. There's some green stuff. There's some set-asides that we would rather, we think maybe aren't the most useful. But what it does have are major investments in water and broadband. We would see clean water and drinking water SRF reauthorization to the tune of billions, and there are billions more for broadband expansion. So there is definitely a robust appetite among the Democratic caucus for a sizable amount of infrastructure investment, and we're hoping to see that we can get a major package passed this summer. One last note on the Biden agenda. As we all know, former presidential candidate and former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, was nominated by President Biden to be Secretary of Transportation. He's already had his Senate hearing. He sailed through. It was actually quite impressive. A lot of the senators said that they found the experience refreshing, frankly. He answered questions directly. He didn't try to dance around. He admitted when he needed to go back and learn more about something. He seems pretty eager to take on the role. And frankly, the most encouraging thing about him as the nominee is that he supports, again, massive infrastructure investment, public works projects. He knows, as mayor of a Midwestern town, that a lot of the country is, in dire need of investment. Our infrastructure is crumbling. So he, honestly is not a bad pick for the position. We can work with him, and I expect that, he'll at least, try to listen to us in areas that we disagree. So I'm encouraged by his nomination. I think that is some good news for us. We're expecting a full vote from the Senate soon, but considering the way that a lot of the Republican senators were talking about him in the hearing, I don't think that, he'll have any trouble getting confirmed. I expect it'll be another near unanimous confirmation, but it's really just a matter of time at this point for them to schedule the vote. Talking a little more about the Build Back Better plan. We'll get into a little more detail about that. So what Biden campaigned on was a $2 trillion package. A lot of that money, about $400 billion, was a procurement investment in Buy American products and manufacturing. I know that is going to be a contentious issue in Washington. The Democratic caucus is frankly a little split on Buy American, but Biden has made that a major component of his campaign. So foreign manufacturers, they might not see a lot of benefit from this, but American domestic companies hopefully will be able to get a slice of that investment that comes as a part of this package. In addition to that, he's looking at $300 billion in R&D and breakthrough technology research. A lot of that is going to go to stuff like electric vehicles. A fair amount of that is going to go to 5G rollout. He's also talking about stuff like AI, other emerging technologies. What I did find interesting is that he specifically mentions lightweight materials, potentially including plastics even. That is something that we're going to keep an eye on. When we see the final package, there may be some research that might be beneficial to this industry. We're going to have to keep a close watch on that, though, because that doesn't necessarily gel with some of the moving away from oil and gas that the Biden administration has talked about doing. So interesting thing, I just want to highlight that. I can't make any promises about it, unfortunately, because I'm not on the team drafting the legislation, but it's interesting that he did include that as part of the plan. Now, the meat of the package from an infrastructure perspective is going to be the actual infrastructure investment funding. So what is he targeting? He's targeting things like repairing roads and bridges, basic surface transportation stuff. Excuse me. He's also looking at ports, airports, EV charging stations, rail networks. He is the Amtrak president. Water funding, electric grid and broadband. Those are expected to be billion-dollar parts of the package. That is something that in our conversation with Hill leadership, we have noted that there is substantial interest in getting something done, particularly on the House side. Chairman DeFazio has kind of made it a mission of his on the T&I committee to get that state revolving fund money reauthorized. It's a frequent talking point of his that they have not actually been reauthorized since they were created. It's all been done through appropriations. He kind of made it a mission of his to get that funding reauthorized in the last Congress, and leadership kind of decided to kick it down the road to this one. Now that they have control of both chambers in the White House, he's talking about tens of billions of dollars into water funding, and we'll get more into that in a bit. But the understanding that the need is there, and the understanding that the appetite, I should say, for something to happen is there. So that's a very encouraging sign. Likewise on broadband, and again, I don't want to get into too much now because Evan's going to talk about it. A lot of the House Democratic leadership, especially during the pandemic, the rise of telework, telecommuting, telehealth, they know that there is a major need for serious investment, and we're talking about figures as high as $80 billion going into broadband alone. So lots of encouraging signs from this. We're going to have to be very involved. We're going to have to play defense on some things, but there could be some significant wins for us in this package. The rest of it is more green stuff, green power investment, solar, wind, renewables, investing in clean energy technology, and then weatherizing buildings and promoting energy efficiency in new and existing buildings. And that is something that we'll talk about a little more on the state level. That is something that could potentially slip through, and even include things like banning natural gas hookups in new buildings. I haven't seen anything about that in the plan, but knowing that that's where some of the states are looking at going, it is something that we're going to need to be careful and make sure that that doesn't make its way into this national plan. One last thing before I turn it over to Evan. So the last Congress, this was kind of one of the last things they were able to get through in the lame duck period. PHMSA reauthorization expired in September of 2019. They were able to pass the Pipes Act, which reauthorized the agency late into the lame duck. And Evan, if you want to talk a little bit about what that included and what the issues with that were, I'll turn it over to you now.
You bet. Zach, can you go back to the previous slide quickly? I just want to comment quickly on this. Keep in mind that this is the president's blueprint. We do expect a lot more information even today, as Zach had said, but this is what Biden's looking at. Not much what we've seen has changed since what he put out during the campaign. I can tell you that some of the legislation that passed or that was introduced last year that House Democrats put together, we expect to see a lot of that. So there'll be significant funding, significant policy related, not just to energy, but to water, wastewater, to broadband deployment. And frankly, I would say every PPI division is going to be impacted by some of the climate provisions. So Zach's exactly right, that we are presented with a lot of challenges, especially on the EPSD front. There's a downright attack on the use of and restrictions, proposed restrictions on the use of fossil fuels. But there's also opportunities for plastic pipe in other markets. So I just want to mention that. And Zach, you're right about Buttigieg. I think he's a good pick. You might recall, usually transportation is considered or supposed to be considered, a bipartisan policy shop. And so this is often where a president will pick someone from the opposite party to show a sign of bipartisanship. I think Buttigieg was a good pick. I think Zach's right about that. So with that, we can talk about something he'll be addressing, which is pipeline safety and some of the mandates. There were too many mandates in the last thing, but just a little refresher on pipeline safety. The program had expired in September of 2019. So we went well over a year without authorization on that. The bill was based on distribution, so obviously a big issue for EPSD in the wake of that Merrimack Valley pipeline incident that had to do with 3 towns in Massachusetts and overpressurization problem that really didn't have to do with the plastic pipe as much as it had to do with the lack of information that the operator has provided to the contractor doing the work. But what I'm getting at is, while we usually see a focus on oil and or gas transmission, this pipeline bill was all about, or mostly about, distribution. So, they did, the Senate passed their version of the bill in the summer of last year. And then there was just ongoing fights over everything from the cost benefit to what they've really been arguing about is whether or not to address methane emissions. And that's where PPI should be concerned. And this is where we see some opportunities here. So there's a couple of sections in the final bill that, as Zach said, was included in the year-end omnibus and COVID relief package, huge bill in December, of last year, but did have the pipeline provision did have some methane emissions. They were able to strike agreement. The initial fight was industry did not want to see an environmental issue considered or provisions included in a pipeline safety bill when that's really an environmental issue. The line was, go talk to EPA, not to PHMSA, if you want to talk about methane emission. That said, there was a showstopper. They were going to, House Democrats were going to see some type of language that addressed methane emissions. So here's what we ended up with in the final package. Basically, two areas. One's on leak detection and repair, where operators are going to have to implement leak detection and repair programs, minimum performance standards that are consistent with available technologies. They'd have to be able to identify, locate, and categorize potentially hazardous leaks, and require that leak detection technologies provide for continuous monitoring by the operator without imposing new design or installation requirements. That's where the industry really put their foot down, saying they weren't going to go that route with new requirements on design and installation. The other section is regarding inspection and maintenance plans. Those plans have to comply with the new leak detection and repair provisions. PHMSA has to consider if the plans contribute to public safety, help eliminate hazardous leaks, and minimize general gas leaks. There are some reporting requirements. There are DIMP requirements that to evaluate risks associated with cast iron pipes. We all know about that. MAO, maximum allowable operating pressure exceedances, and other requirements that were a result of that Merrimack Valley incident. So in the end, not too much directly impacting PPI, but whenever they talk about addressing methane, it certainly helps that our guys, I won't say rust-proof, leak-proof, or I think half of you will beat me over the head, but highly resistant, highly corrosion resistant, highly leak resistant pipe. In other words, when you are, through the fusion process, if you're making two pieces of pipe, one, it certainly is a compelling point when you're talking about addressing methane leaks. So that's where we are on pipeline safety. Next slide, Zach. I do want to talk a little bit about just the general statement, and I'm going to get to some other divisions. We'll talk about water in a few minutes and broadband, but the big challenges are facing the EPSD guys. If you look at, and these are transmission incidents, over the past couple of years between Dakota Access, Atlantic Coast, recent action on Keystone, Mountain Valley, all these projects have either been delayed, terminated, or the project operator pulled the plug because of what seemingly endless litigation. It's become a real problem. And when you have owners killing projects because it's just not worth the time or the money because of constant objection and litigation from the environmental community, I hate to say it, folks, but right now the pipeline opponents are winning the PR game. So, we're not alone, and we have some allies with contractor groups, obviously with the American Gas Association, with the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, with the American Petroleum Institute, lots of industry friends, but we certainly have our work cut out for us. I would like to say, when I first started working for PPI, for the Energy Piping Division, one of the first things we did was support legislation that would streamline and frankly update the permit process for pipeline projects. That process has, frankly, on day one in the Trump administration, he helped get a lot, institute environmental actions that would help get projects off the ground quicker. The Biden administration on day one rebutted a lot of that. And if he hasn't done it yet, we expect him to do that. So we have seen some improvement in the general permitting process, but the problem we face now is really in the courts. And I have colleagues that have described it to me as if you have a 100-mile stretch of pipe and several water crossings that require permits, and let's say it's 100 permits for 100 miles, okay? All the environmentalists really have to do is score one victory in court and kill one permit, and you're at least delaying the project. And a lot of times they don't want an answer on this, they just want to delay it. And this is where they're winning too. They're delaying it to the point that the owners are saying, the heck with it, it's just not worth it. And we've seen that on some serious, some important pipeline projects.
Your diet. What's wrong with you, kid?
Oh, didn't know if we got a question there.
Everyone, if you would please keep yourself on mute.
Died. That sucks.
Okay.
Joe, I'm seeing you talking. I'm gonna go ahead and mute him, Evan. I'm sorry. Didn't continue.
I thought maybe someone heard me say rust-proof, leak-proof, and they're already yelling at me.
Oh, Mike.
Next time, slides in.
Pay Agro extra to hire the handicap.
Zach, can we get the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay. Now, this is what really makes me nervous because we're not just dealing federally. This is a pretty recent map that I came across from S&P Global. And I don't know if you can see, might not be able to read this, so I'll describe what we're seeing is some states taking action either through the executive, through the governor's office, or in state legislation that would prohibit building using fossil fuels or phasing it out through even through electrification codes. So what you see here on this map, those blue states, and it's not going to surprise you that it's California, Washington, New York, and Mass, and I believe Rhode Island. They have local building gas bans and electrification codes that have either been adopted or are in development. So very concerning because we're not talking about, it used to be the idea was to keep it in the ground. That's how you went after fossil fuels. And then that didn't work for a while. So they went after the pipeline transportation of natural gas. Now they're doing ordinances on new local buildings that are restricting the use of natural gas. So very concerning. The good news on this, if you look at the pink states, they have either introduced legislation to prohibit local restrictions on utility service by fuel type, including prohibiting gas bans, or the redder shade of pink, if you will, has passed legislation prohibiting those local measures to block access based on fuel type, including natural gas bans. So the states are doing some things. Some are not doing. Some have been successful in passing legislation, and some are at least trying to do the right thing. But then you have, some of those left-leaning states, and I say that as an understatement, downright going after the use of natural gas. We have said continually that industry is in favor of increased use of renewable fuel, but natural gas is going to help get you there. You're not going to be able to do it without natural gas. So the blue states are certainly, what they're doing there is concerning. And Dave, we'll make sure that you can give these slides to anybody, and anyone can reach out to me if they have more questions on this, but this is certainly something that the EPSD side will be monitoring. And I ask all of you, if you see or hear rumblings on either side of this, if folks are putting in protections or trying to restrict the use of fossil fuels, especially natural gas, please let us know, and we'll be all over that. Next slide, Zach. So quickly on what to expect this year, and Zach hit on a lot of this. Just like Trump did in 2017 and January 20th of 2017, put in a lot of executive actions. Biden has already or plans to roll back a lot of those rollbacks, a lot dealing with the permit process for infrastructure projects, especially for oil and gas. Again, in the states, and certainly you'll see in climate legislation and energy legislation, energy provisions in an infrastructure package, a general shift away from fossil fuels. That's what you'll see on the Democratic side. Some heck of a lot harder than others, and you'll see some of our friends from Oklahoma, from Missouri, from Texas sticking up for fossil fuels and trying to block that legislation. You'll see a lot more on methane. Some of the EEOs have actually rolled back some of the Trump administration's executive orders on methane. Also venting flaring. And again, this isn't all bad news, because if we're going to at least recognize that we need natural gas, why not use the infrastructure that generally does not leak and does not rust? So even on the venting and flaring, they're cracking down on. We've always said that why don't we expand our gathering capacity to pipe those resources, not flare it or vent it into the atmosphere, but pipe it and bring it to market. And the reason we can't is because we have limited gas gathering capacity. So still an issue here. We don't really know what's going to happen with hydraulic fracturing policy. I think, Zach, you told me, and I think I double checked on you, but even in the Biden platform during the campaign, he didn't even mention fracking. So there's no solid even opinion right now. There's a lot of different opinions on what the administration will do, but certainly it'll be an issue as the infrastructure package is put together. And let me quickly say this. Any president, if you look at Obama, he got elected, he wanted to do economic recovery in 2008, and he wanted to do, so that was the stimulus package, and he wanted to do healthcare. So a president, when they're first elected, has probably the most political capital they're going to have before they start forcing votes and putting in policies that a large percentage of the country is going to be against. So right now, if Biden is serious about obviously addressing the pandemic is going to be number one priority, but with a lot of talk about infrastructure, as Zach pointed out, putting a significant and robust infrastructure package, not first year, but by the summer, so we hope to see something. Even by today, we'll see what they're looking for in terms of infrastructure, but that means PPI has got to be on its game early, just as Zach has pointed out. And the last one, and this was one of the EOs, ending oil and gas leases on federal land. So, a lot of these things, we don't have final decisions, nothing legislatively, obviously, but certainly the Biden administration, in a matter of, a couple of weeks, has already acted on a lot of these things dealing with energy policy. Next slide, Zach. I do want to mention, again, this is more for the MID folks on the call. One of, I think, the largest COVID relief packages was last spring. I think it was in April. HR2. This was the monstrosity, and a lot of stuff that we did not like in here, but there was a lot of stuff in terms of water infrastructure. And the MID will remember when I was working closer with you. We did a lot to try to increase federal funding and supporting federal policy that would open the door for investment, both publicly and from the private sector, into the water and wastewater infrastructure market. So this HR2, and this was a Nancy Pelosi, she put this together, and this is where Speaker Pelosi, frankly, is very pro-infrastructure and pro-industry. And that HR2 had $40 billion for the Clean Water SRF and another 11 for drinking water. I'm not sure if we'll see that again, those levels. I don't think we want to see those levels again, because I don't think they stand any chance of passing in a final bill. I mention this, though, because we had supported in the past, recognizing the reluctance or hesitation to increase federal funding. One of the best ways to open the door for private investment, and therefore public-private partnerships, is to lift the cap on private activity bonds for water and wastewater infrastructure. So in the past, that had been, if we had minor not too much support, but it generally came from the Republican side that wanted to say, look, we have a private sector that wants to invest. Let's save that public revenue, tax revenue, and let the private sector invest in this. And again, the PAB legislation, it's now exempt facility bonds that they're referred to as. This would just remove the state volume cap on these bonds that restricts the amount of PABs or EFBs that can be allocated in a given state. If you get rid of that cap, you are basically have no restrictions on the amount of federal dollars that can go into this market. The investors want to invest in this. Generally, because of those limitations and the out of sight, out of mind basis of water infrastructure, PABs generally went to other more politically attractive projects like student housing, student loans, some things that get you in the paper a lot more than building a water system or a sewer system. Importantly, though, in this HR2, again, a Pelosi bill, she put in, the Democratic left-leaning Speaker of the House put in a provision that would lift the cap on PABs for both water and wastewater. I think the wording was make it one of the categories that where the state volume cap does not apply. So I was very encouraged by this because that showed true bipartisan support. A lot of Republicans didn't back HR2. It was not because of the PAB provision. It was because of, you know, $50+ billion for public money for water and wastewater. So we do anticipate increased funding, public funding in an infrastructure package, but we're really going to be pushing to for that PAB provision to open the door for private investment. Next slide, Zach. I think we're doing okay because I think we want to allow for 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A. Okay, on the broadband side, and then this is really for the Power and Communications Division. You know, this is the bright spot we're dealing with. You know, and this is especially true since the pandemic hit. One of the first things we saw and we advocated for is if you're gonna need increased telehealth, homeschooling, virtual meetings like this, you need a heck of a lot more broadband out there. And I've worked with other groups and gotten PPI's Power and Communication Division to sign on some of this stuff. Basically, the industries I work with are saying there's there's a lot of talk about being technology neutral in broadband deployment. We think that's a myth. You need the superior technology, that's fiber optic. The Power and Communications Contractors Association long advocated for fiber, and since you can't push for a specific technology, we talked about need for speed requirements. What we've advocated before is 100 microbits per second up and download. Right now, the FCC's Federal Communication Commission's target speed is 25 download, 3 upload. We're not going to be able to have 116 people on a virtual meeting like we do right now if we don't, from across the country, because I think part of the new normal will be a lot more of these virtual meetings. We're going to need a heck of a lot higher up speed than that. And generally, we push for 100 up and 100 down. Now, all this does is, without saying you need fiber, it basically effectively requires fiber because to meet those speed thresholds. And I'll briefly say some of the success we've had so far with this. There's this Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. Those of you in the PCC division might know about this. It's a new federal program where they had a reverse auction basically for broadband deployment. It's some $20 billion over 10 or 15 years. And the first auction, 97% of the winning bids committed to 100 up, 100 down. So someone's listening to us. 85% of those committed to one gig. All of that bodes very well for the conduit division, the PCC division, and for use of fiber optic when it comes policy that supports fiber optic and broadband deployment. We've said that you need increased oversight. We have seen, and the contractors love talking about this. and they're not afraid to talk about this, but they've seen several carriers do the bare minimum to secure federal funding. So in other words, if they want to they might patch over a copper system to get that 25.3. All the more reason you need oversight to ensure that these carriers are making good with their commitments. One of the most recent concerns on the broadband side is that those carriers, I'll just point them out, Elon Musk and his SpaceX, they have unproven technology where fiber optic has a long track record of being able to effectively deploy broadband in a superior way. On that RDOF, that reverse auction I just talked about, SpaceX got $850 million when they haven't proven that that technology works. There's no real track record. And one of the guys I work with said, if Elon Musk, let him do his R&D on his own dime, not on the federal dime. So that's kind of been our line with that. And I would think that PPI would support us on that. So we've kind of been winning the battle on speeds, but when it comes to unproven technologies, we have a lot of work to do. I can say that we recently supported a letter that got 160 lawmakers on it in the House and Senate that went to the FCC saying, please require these bidders, these winning bidders, to make good on their commitments. They have to show that they have the funding, the operational capacity, they have the goods to make good. If you say you're going to provide a gig, prove that. And so I was very encouraged to see, 160 plus supporting not just the concern with unproven technologies, but also supporting those speed requirements. So a lot of good things happening on the broadband front. We just need, it's been interesting working for business side of things and a business group pushing for more oversight. It's pretty encouraging stuff. Last one, Zach, and you can weigh in on this.
I just want to jump in
Please.
real quick just to add to the congressional support line. A lot of the support that we're getting is coming from leadership as well. These aren't just rank and file folks. We were working very closely last year with Jim Clyburn, the House Democratic Whip. He had a bill come out that would have incorporated a lot of the stuff that we were looking at. So we're getting some very strong support from within the Democratic caucus on this, and that is an encouraging sign that a lot of our priorities on this stuff is eventually going to make it into legislation.
Okay, lastly, so Zach covered the first part. We're looking at the next COVID relief, certainly stimulus, infrastructure packages. We had asked him, this was a slide from the last EPSD Government Affairs Committee. I'm interested, doesn't have to be today, but would like to know if and how many PPI folks took advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program in terms of small business loans. Because if so, we should be on record supporting that. I would think, and Dave and Randy and the other division chairs, we can talk more about that. But interested to see if PPI has or should we have a position on the PPP, because I think you're going to see small business loans going into next year. I talked about the ongoing attack on fossil fuels, natural gas in particular. I'm also interested in whether or not PPI should take a position on some of these labor issues, and I'll tell you why. There's legislation that is certain to make a comeback, known as the PRO Act, that has a bunch of different, it basically has the entire Christmas tree of ornaments that big labor wants to see. And I know some of us come from, the labor-friendly states and others from right-to-work states. Why I'm interested in some of this. Some of the concerning things in the PRO Act that I think we really need to look at are basically they're trying to find a way to eliminate right-to-work states, which I can tell you on the contractor side, the contractors are very concerned with that when you have 27, 28 states that have already passed right-to-work laws. It's gonna upend a lot of these states. The other thing is we're looking at, and this is, you've heard the president on the campaign trail and since talk about through all these programs creating millions of union jobs. And so part of that is he's looking at mandatory project labor agreements on all federal projects, not just some of the highway stuff, but on all federal projects to the extent they can do that. So these things are concerning, and it's not it's more of an issue, obviously, for some of the contractors that Zach and I work with, but you know, we're all in this together. You know, if they need to buy conduit, they need to buy, you know, plastic polyethylene for gas distribution, PE for water and wastewater. Anything that will disrupt these projects is going to disrupt the manufacturing sector as well. So interested to hear on the PPI members' take on labor policy. The last one, I had some folks sign on a letter with the increasing state efforts and successful efforts to legalize the use of marijuana, not just medically, but recreationally. Employers are concerned. They want to be able to, without getting in trouble, maintain zero tolerance policy for a lot of these sectors. The construction industry can be dangerous. You need people to be sober on the job. So they want to make sure that, and I think they're just looking downfield and saying, look, the construction industry is a risk. It comes with its hazards. So we want to make sure that we can maintain zero tolerance for drug use. So with that, we got Randy. We got 9 minutes, I guess, so we can stay on. So with that, I guess we can open up to questions. Dave and Randy.
Evan, Zach, let me start by saying thank you for the overview. A lot of great information that you gentlemen covered. I do have one question in the chat that came up, and then we'll open this up to the floor. It's not one that I've heard of, but the question is, will methane gas permeability become an issue with polyethylene pipes? And I've not heard that concern raised. Evan, Zach, Randy, any issues there from what you're hearing?
I haven't heard anything new that we haven't heard before. Hasn't that always been something that, you know, the cast iron guys has thrown at? It's kind of a false rock that they've thrown at the industry in the past. I haven't heard anything new, and certainly haven't seen anything on paper addressing that.
And this is Randy. I have seen, you know, some on methane leakage or permeability through polyethylene, but it's always been shown that, you know, much more so where you have joints or other connections or seals, you're going to get a lot more methane leak there than you would get permeating through the pipe. It does become a bigger question as we start to look at blending of hydrogen into the system, and because hydrogen has, you know, much more ability to move through you know, plastic materials. So that's something that's being looked at carefully as they start to blend in hydrogen to varying levels. But those things are out there now, and I know there's groups working on that issue currently.
And Randy, I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't get into hydrogen because I know we're at the beginning stages of coming up with a position on that, but I know EPST folks are working with AGA on that. But hydrogen will be a big issue in future energy policy. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, there's a couple active projects, like you said, working with AGA and also with the CGA and CSA as well, have programs going on that.
All right, again, please feel free to put your questions into the chat or just come off of mute and ask your question. So any further questions? Okay, we have one here in the chat room. Renewables forecast for the next couple of years. Any comments there on where you guys see that trending?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to see legislatively, and I think within the agencies, big pushes for increased use of renewables. What we need to do is, and this is a tough nut to crack, but keep hammering them that you're not going to get there. You're not going to reach these ambitious goals. First of all, you're not going to reach, you know, the Green New Deal anyway, as it's been proposed, but you're not going to be able to significantly increase the use of renewables without natural gas to help get you there, and therefore the pipeline capacity to move that natural gas. But yeah, generally you should watch for a constant barrage of legislation calling for or requiring the increased use of renewable energy. And probably, Dave, we'll see more over the next couple of days as Biden's Build Better Back program comes out. You probably see a lot on that.
Yeah, good, Evan. Randy, I have a question that is we've dealt with the unions in the past at different times, and I think seeing what's going on, they've put so much support towards Biden, so he has to work with them on a lot of things, but they're always seemingly at odds with the environmental side that also supported them. Do you see this as a good time for PPI to get more maybe re-engaged with some of the unions?
I think that's a great idea, Randy. If you recall, I think, I guess 6 years ago, we sat down with the Blue Green Alliance, which is a coalition of unions and environmental organizations that have gotten together to talk infrastructure and try to come up with a list of things that they can support. That list continues to get more and more narrow. But yeah, I think we totally should re-engage with some of these unions. I would also say that I like to look at the Blue Green Alliance as kind of a barometer of where we are. The Obama administration was a heck of a lot more green than blue. And I think you see a Biden administration, hopefully, being a little more blue than green. And we'll see. I mean, he killed the Keystone Pipeline on day one. I'm hoping that that's kind of the carrot, or one of the that's a big carrot, but one of the favors he threw at the environmentalists. Whereas he talks about climate, but whenever he's talking about labor, he's talking about union. And so I'm not sure PPI should take a hard line on this, but I think you're exactly right. We should engage the unions, have a dialogue with them. And you remember, Randy, when we sat down with the UA, the pipe fitters union, they said, yeah, we had a reluctance about dealing with plastic pipe, and we know that in the energy industry, this is the way we have to train. And so PPI maintained a pretty good relationship with the UA ever since. But it's certainly, I think that's a good idea. We should certainly re-engage. And it wouldn't be a bad idea, for the other divisions to do the same. And I'm thinking, hopefully on water, wastewater, but certainly on broadband, because there is a lot of work coming down the pipe in the broadband deployment arena. So we just got to make sure we can do what we can to make sure they're talking fiber and conduit made by PPI members.
Excellent, thank you.
We'll make a final call out to any questions. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Again, if you'd like to just take yourself off mute and ask a question, please feel free to do so at this time.
Hey, Evan, this is Vic from Chevron Phillips. When do you think you'll see the spurt in all these infrastructure growth projects, given that COVID is still lurking around? Do you think another 3 to 4 months later, perhaps later in the fall or sooner? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, now, just so I think I had another chime in when you were talking. So you asked about maybe a timeline for an infrastructure package?
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. And we're hoping it's sooner than later, because again, this, if it happens sooner, it kind of reflects a higher priority by the president, again, using political capital that he's got at the beginning of his administration. Word on the street is, well, I mean, if we hear from the White House today or this week on what Biden, a little more information than what he had in his campaign platform, certainly I haven't seen pen to paper legislatively, but I do think you'll see comprehensive infrastructure. Might not be comprehensive starting out, but certainly as different committees put in what they want to see. The House Transportation Infrastructure will put in a lot of highway stuff. They'll put in water stuff. Energy and Commerce will put in broadband stuff. They'll put in drinking water stuff. So, and then down the road, hopefully we'll see bits and pieces of this going into the summer. And then they'll start wrapping it up into a what they hope to be a too big to fail. There'll be something for everybody later in the year. I don't think you'll see this pass through Congress this year, but hopefully you have a pretty good idea of what folks are looking at. And so, yeah, I think for all PPI divisions, there are opportunities, but certainly challenges with, say the AOC type green infrastructure, renewables, cracking down on fossil fuels on the energy side. So yeah, opportunities and challenges for PPI, and I think you'll see legislative proposals over the next couple of months. This won't be something that'll be put off into next year. And Zach, let me know if you disagree with that.
I mean, no, I think you're absolutely right. I'm more optimistic on seeing something get passed than you might be. But, one of the procedural quirks that I mentioned earlier with reconciliation, generally you only get one bite at the apple with that. But if you don't use it, it can get pushed to next year. Republicans did not pass a big reconciliation bill in the final year of the Trump administration. The Democrats get 2 this year, and it looks like they're going to try to use them both on Biden's big stimulus packages. So the second one, I'm a little more optimistic that it'll get passed, but I just want to bring it kind of back full circle. Any individual senator can kill the entire package, which means that Joe Manchin is going to be really the decider on this. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of Green New Deal type stuff because of that, but smaller provisions, that could potentially sneak past him are the exact sort of stuff that advocacy is going to need to be important to bring to his attention and to bring to other senators too, as well, frankly.
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Zach. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so that's all the more reason why advocacy is important right now. This is going to be a behemoth of a bill, and frankly, there are a lot of senators that maybe aren't necessarily going to be aware of some of these smaller provisions that might seem unimportant to them, but for our industry could be either extremely beneficial or extremely damaging. We're going to have to be very, very active with this second package to make sure that it's something that's really going to help us and not be counterproductive.
Well, second package, and then there will be a full-on infrastructure at some point, probably sooner than later. Let me just say this, Dave, before, yesterday, and this was based on the latest, Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, but he brought in 10 Republican senators yesterday to the White House. They sat around the Oval Office and talked about it. So to me, that does show at least that Biden knows he needs some Republican support, and he's bringing them in to talk. And I think this is where you can say what you want about having a president who's been in Washington too long, but this is one of the benefits. He is at least talking to the Republican side about this, and I can see those 10 senators back in the office talking about infrastructure in the future.
All right, we'll give it a few seconds here in case there's any other questions. We're reaching the end of our hour. All right, not hearing any. One more time, thank you, Evan. Thank you, Zach. Very informative here today. And stay safe, everyone. Thank you for participating in today's webinar event sponsored by PPI. Take care.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Evan and Zach.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ray.